They could deploy troops along the entire thing and not have a significant, any sizable gap in sight and coverage for that border, or rather perimeter. They could lift the blockade tomorrow. They could deploy troops to the perimeter, lift that blockade tomorrow, and be perfectly secure.
That is wild to say after October 7th.
Israel is ramping up a significant amount of steam, but on the other hand, they are doing a ton of disproportionate damage to Gaza. Of course they're not going to be able to do that
anymore because of the bombing campaign
and
the land invasion.
The
yes,
amount of damage that you do in order to achieve that goal has to be proportionate. 10,000, possibly all civilians, but let's say mostly, significantly mostly civilians, is not proportional. And that's the part where those
proportionality isn't they have to be equal in numbers of deaths. That is not what proportionality means.
I don't think that just being used as a base of operations is a justification.
Well, not just a base of operations. They're actively attacking you from this location, right? So I'm not saying they're putting munitions on there.
No, I'm not saying they're putting weapons cache. I'm not talking about looking over a map. I'm saying as a base of operations. Yes.
Okay, no one. That's just wrong. Speak of the devil. And the devil appears. Hello.
Hey, what's up, buddy?
Hey, can you turn yourself up just a smidge?
Give me a sec. I haven't done this in a while.
Yeah, it's hard to hear you.
How's that? Any better?
A little bit. Let me do it on my end too. Okay, countdown from 10 to 1. 10 to 1 for me.
And 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Okay. I think we're good now. I think we're ready. I think we're ready to have a discussion.
Awesome.
What's up, man? What was the culinary project
delight for the evening?
Yes.
Thanks for reminding me. I had to post it somewhere. It was a braised lamb shank and a bunch of different spices cooked for about 4 or 5 hours. Then I threw it in the fridge overnight so those flavors could develop. And then today I reheated it, made a sauce out of the braising liquid, and put it on top of polenta.
Wow. You know what? Look, now I'm hungry. I just had some food, but now I'm like, man. I just had some microwave taquitos. It wasn't anything great, but it was quick and it was easy and it was ready to go, right? So, yeah.
I mean, taquitos, you say?
Yeah, taquitos. They just a Walmart brand, but it's really good. I enjoyed it.
I mean, that sounds delicious to me.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, like, I like them because it's something I can literally just before my stream throw it in and then pull it out, and then I'm
yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm a slut for that. I keep a freezer full of dumplings.
Okay.
Yeah, just nice little delicious freezer dumplings. That are you can either throw them in a pan, cook them up that way, or you can steam them. It's super easy. Yeah. I'll eat them breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
Sweet. Well, once you post that the delicious lamb shank, the braised lamb shank, let me know. I've always enjoyed seeing your culinary.
Are links allowed in your chat?
Jealous. Yeah, it should be.
All right, there you go, guys.
Boom, check it out, gang. But now that we've cooked some food, let's do some discourse cooking. Okay, let's cook some discourse.
Let's cook.
What do you so you reached out, you wanted to be on my show. I was arguing with Sunday and his cohorts. I'm gonna be clear. I'm not exactly sure what the critique here or what the discussion here. I have some ideas, but I wanna hear from you. I don't want to prime the pump, so to speak. I want to just horse's mouth it. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I kind of came in with the same thought. Like I've seen some of your conversations with Socrates, with there are a bunch of people, some dude named Kid Not Kin, I think.
Yeah.
The conversation you were having with Joe Lewis and all that. So I've seen a few of your conversations. So I kind of came here just with the general idea that you and I probably have some disagreements. You know, obviously we have had some disagreements.
Yeah, that's okay.
So I really wanted to. I know that you've been kind of seeking more information and just kind of like trying to figure out, you know, your stance on this bit by bit. I think I've seen you evolve a little bit in your stance. And I honestly, so for me, this issue about 4 years ago, 2019, I think, Abby Martin came on to the Joe Rogan podcast. And I used to be a voracious consumer of that podcast, and not so much anymore. But she came on and said some crazy stuff, and I was like, "Whoa, this is kind of insane," because in America we're born and bred pro-Israel, right? Like both parties make it part of their platform. We understand it's the only democracy in the Middle East. It's the the ultimate ally for America over there. And so the idea of Israel being bad in any way is like, it's untenable. Why would that? But as I often do with a lot of things when I'm challenged, just a little more background since you don't know me. I used to be a really, really conservative.
Okay.
I grew up Christian conservative. Spent not like the super fire and brimstone. Like oddly enough, I wasn't raised to hate gay people. Just think that their lifestyle was bad. But never like a hateful kind of Christianity. But then some years later, my views on gay marriage changed. And from there, it was just like a slow trickle of, well, if I'm wrong about this, what else? And just year over year, the drug war was a big thing for me, learning about the origins of the drug war, learning about how the drug war has disproportionately affected certain groups of people, the intent behind the drug war, the drug policy and how that doesn't work, proper treatment policies, what actually works versus what we think, when we look at addicts and think, well, you guys just need to decide to stop doing drugs. Just that kind of ignorant mindset. Like a lot of that I've worked out over the years. So, but Israel, being very pro-Israel is something that I had never been challenged on. So then Abby Martin comes onto that Joe Rogan podcast and says some things, and I'm like, well, I'm going to spot check this stuff rather than just kind of close my ears, because that's kind of what I learned through that conservative to liberal and now a very progressive liberal
It's a wise
transformation.
Thing to do, but yes, go ahead.
So come about that time, she said something about I think this might have been in her 2021 podcast with him, said something about prison rates or conviction rates, that there is a 98% conviction rate for all Palestinians. They are not given rights to due process that Israeli civilians are. They are not given rights to a speedy trial. A lot of those arrests are political.
Oh, just real quick.
Yeah.
You know what the conviction rate in the U.S. is, right?
No, what's that?
98%.
Yeah, but you know what we have? Due process.
Yes, I understand. But usually what happens is, well, we got our own problems in America. Like we offer deals to people, right? And I think this ups the conviction rate a lot. Like it doesn't go to trial unless we're sure that it has a leg to stand on, if you will, and that's why most trials end up in convictions and most charges end up sticking. Because people are offered deals like, you plead guilty to this and we'll let you off.
Oh yeah,
there's a whole thing to it, right? So America isn't innocent in this, right?
We absolutely exactly. But
but carry on. I just wanted that 98% sounds bad, but it's not. It's kind of standard.
It is when you think of the fact that we try to, for the most part, we don't have political prisoners. Every now and then a corporation can come along and screw someone that was trying to out them, right? But otherwise, we don't really have political prisoners here. We have a court run by civilians, jury of peers. In Palestine, it's a military court, right? These civilians are subjected to a military court. So just at that point, that 98% is a lot more nefarious than in our end. But the whole point being that and they don't have a right to defense or any of that crap, like in the USA. So with all that, there were just more and more things I looked into, and then funny enough, back in July, I had taken an interest in the subject again. At this point, my views had changed to just still Israel, great, deserves to have all the land they have, but the settlements are bad. And that's where a lot of people sit right now, right? Settlements are bad, don't do that stuff, whatever. And that was about it, but I started to do some research again. And then come a week before this, I was talking to 𝙎𝙪𝙗, and I was like, a week before October 7th, I was like, what's going to be the next crazy thing? Like the next Ukraine, the next thing that really just kind of shakes the world, defines the news cycle for a long time. And I shit you not, 6 days later, the Hamas attack happened. So that's kind of lit a fire under my ass as far as wanting to, read more, do more research. And in the ensuing weeks, I've read a lot of articles. I've read excerpts from books, and in doing so, I've come to read some full books in the last couple weeks. And a lot of the stuff that I found on myself.
If I may.
Let's see, Method and Madness by Finkelstein. and
just DM the
got
links to me, because I'm
yeah,
always looking for more information, right? I'm always
yeah.
looking for more stuff. So send me the links, or if you want to post them in the chat, that's fine. I just want to know where we're where the foundation's coming from. Does that make sense? Right.
Well, so
So
I can do that, and so I will say that Finkelstein kind of helps to give a what do you call it, like a consolidation, because a lot of the stuff that Finkelstein uses, whether it's from human rights groups or various news sources, are before I read his book. Those sources I kind of came to already. So let me get you got Method of
please.
Madness, Amazon. I'll link that, and that's going in your chat. And then what's the other one? Gaza Inquest. Let's see. Boom. All right, I'll link that one now.
Okay, sweet.
So these are good because if you were to just go through the appendix at the end, or the citations pages, the bibliography, that's where a lot of the stuff I've come to. So the human rights organizations, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, Haaretz, journalism, New York Times, bunch of different sources. So it really just started with like a rabbit hole, right? Like, I've heard I'm hearing Israel is doing bad things to the Palestinian people. Where do I start? And so it's like, well, let's look up war crimes. Let's look up, crimes against humanity, if there are any. Let's look up the blockade, try to understand that. Let's understand the operations that have taken place year over year. And it's just kind of led me to this. If I were to summarize my position now, is that in the discourse happening, a lot of attention is being diverted away from the fact that disproportionate force, indiscriminate bombings, all those things are being utilized right now in Gaza.
You say, let's talk about this indiscriminate bombings. What evidence do you have of this?
Okay, so I mean, I can start, like, I can go from my military experience, or I can
Please.
go by UN definitions,
whichever you want. It's all up to you.
So when it comes to let's see, I think 44% of structures, I don't know if it's in North Gaza or all of Gaza. So I will try to be very honest and couch where I'm not 100% recalling the source.
And let's be clear, I just want to be clear to my audience. There's a lot of fog of war here, right? Like no one here has accurate, exact information. We can only go on the numbers we've seen from other sources, from other people. But even then, unless it's like, there are no official numbers out that I'm aware of, right? For casualty rates, bombing rates, etc. We can find anecdotes or not anecdotes, but slivers of data here and there. But yeah, just keep that in mind.
So let's go with this. On October 12th, the IDF themselves reported that they had launched 4,000 tons of explosives onto Gaza. Gaza is one of the most densely populated areas in the world, one of the most. It's a 5 by 25.
2.2 million, correct?
2.3 million, if I understand.
2.3 million. Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
2.3 million. Those 4,000 bombs that they dropped, how many?
4,000 tons.
4,000 tons. So, how many did they kill?
I mean, up to the 12th, I think it was, by that point, over 1,500.
That's a lot.
But
if it was indiscriminate.
Indiscriminate. Right? So let's talk about indiscriminate. So
please.
Indiscriminate bombing, when it comes to the international law, indiscriminate bombing is with little to no regard for civilians or civilian structures.
There's a law of armed combat, right, that you're referring to, right?
Law of armed conflict,
and there's
yes.
3 kind of categories that say what is legitimate, or what makes a target something that you can bomb from the air. There's 3 things, right? And you know what? I should have pulled this up, but give me a second.
Mm-hmm. While you look that up, the
Please,
gist would be...
On, yeah. I didn't mean to interrupt, but I want to...
No, you're fine.
Yeah.
So the gist would be, for what you're going to look up, is that there has to be a military advantage, and it can't just be wanton destruction. There has to be a reason to blow up whatever structure you're taking out. If there's a direct threat posed, if there is an explicit strategic advantage to be gained, for instance,
military necessity, distinction, and proportionality. Are the 3 things. But go on.
We will talk about proportionality. So, so when it comes to, again, so a 155 millimeter mortar shell fired from the M109 howitzer that they use, that mortar shell has a kill radius of 50 to 75 meters and a casualty radius of 150 meters. So think about the significance of that size, right? That's a big freaking range. 50 meters is 150 feet. That's a lot of destruction. So they're shelling buildings. They're using airdrops as well. So there are different missiles being used.
And to be clear, the most densely populated city in the region. Well, maybe not the most, but it's a 2.3 million and a 5x5 box, basically.
Exactly. So if you were using predetermined targets, which they were using immediately, targets they already wanted to take out, you're doing that in a highly dense area. You really do not have on the the international stage a good defense to say you are not indiscriminately bombing. When you launch since I think it was as of 8 days ago, they had launched more mortar shells, rockets bombs and rockets into Gaza than had. I think it might just be shells, which is still pretty significant because that means there's all that other munitions. Than the Afghanistan war for 20 years into one of the most densely populated areas. It just stands on its face as an indiscriminate bombing campaign.
I disagree, and I'll tell you why. Right? If it was indiscriminate, because of those numbers you meant, like they have a 150 meter kill radius, right? You would have to be inept to not even if they weren't taking some care to this. And we can argue, and I would agree with you, that they're not taking enough care. So I guess I'll start with this. If you think I'm here to say that everything the IDF is doing is justified, you're wrong. I don't. I condemn it, right? Especially some of the targetings they've done on refugee camps and things like that. I think that's atrocious. It's a war crime, and they should be held accountable for it. But when you say things like that this is the regular, that's just what they're doing, just carte blanche over the whole course of the thing, I think that's unfair. I think that's wrong, factually. Again, if they wanted to kill as many as possible, or if they just did not care and they weren't using any kind of safety mechanisms or any kind of way to limit civilian casualties, that number that we have, that 10,000 number, Palestinian civilians, you would add a couple zeros there. Because again, you have this large radius of bombs, 4,000 tons of bombs being dropped from the air on these targets. Now you can argue that some of these targets were not appropriate and things like that, and that's fair. And I would agree with you probably on some of them. But to say that they are just indiscriminately bombing, it just falls flat, right?
So not really. I mean, that's a common misconception that indiscriminate bombing is going to mean excessive civilian casualties on a grand scale, like the Tokyo firebombing, the bombing of Dresden, etc. But at the end of the day, 10,000. We're a month in, just over a month in, and before that 30-day mark, we hit 10,000 civilian casualties.
Horrific.
I'm sorry. You know what? I need to withdraw that a little bit. We've hit 10,000 casualties, but if we go historically, it's usually about an 80-20 split. 80% civilian, 20% enemy combatant. That's off of and then when we talk about numbers and people questioning the numbers, for the last 5 to 6 engagements between Palestine and Israel, the numbers, for the most part, that are reported by the Palestinian Health Administration tend to be pretty in concert with Israel and independent groups. Hamas numbers will be, or
numbers. Yeah.
Palestinian numbers will be a little higher. Israeli numbers will be a little lower. And then the human rights groups and the United Nations come in and usually sit about in the middle. Yeah, but 10,000 people.
I have no problem believing that number. I think that's,
but when we talk about accuracy, so I wanted to get the give me 1 second.
Take your time.
I don't have it.
So
on this
let
computer.
me explain for my audience what proportionality is, at least according to the definition of the laws of armed combat, right? So, and you can say that this is not a good definition, or you don't like this definition, or this not definition, but in plain speak, the 3 principles that you have to comply with in order to meet the legal justification for using aerial bombardment on a target are military necessity, distinction, and proportionality. What are those? So, military necessity. An attack or action must be intended to help in the military defeat of the enemy. So it has to be a military target, okay? Necessity, it must be an attack on a military objective. And the proportionality portion is the harm caused to civilians or civilian property. So it's not just lives, it's property at the same time, right? Must be proportional and not excessive in relation to the concrete and direct military advantage anticipated. So whether or not it actually ends up being relation, like proportional, it isn't the bar. It's, do you have a reasonable anticipation that this strike will be not excessive when it comes to property and damage? Now, different countries use a different calculus for this. For some countries like Norway, the civilian death that makes that okay is 0, right? For America, it's much higher, okay? And different countries will have different calculuses that they use for this, right? But this calculus is happening. It is something that they are trying to apply. Again, you can argue that it's not enough, that it's not that they're not taking enough care, and you would like to see that calculus change, and that's fair. But that's a different thing than calling it indiscriminate or even calling it a war crime. Now, again, some of these targets look, again, I don't have all the data, but the strike they did on that refugee camp the other day, that looks to me like a war crime. It does not look justified. But to call, well, let me just ask you this. Do you think every single strike that they have done in Gaza has been a war crime?
Every strike?
Yes, every of these bombings, every building bombed, every time they've targeted something in Gaza and struck it, has it all been just across the board been a war
Every
crime?
single one? No, but
Okay.
with the
what would
level
you
of
consider your
destruction,
the percentage?
well, so it's with the percentage,
Yeah,
fucking
guess.
90.
So 90% of the targets that they have, in your opinion, 90% of the targets have been war crimes.
An indiscriminate bombing of civilian structures is a war crime. It's not a violation, it's a war crime. Disproportionate force is a war crime.
Okay, so in your opinion, and what you're claiming here, is that 90% of the structures that they have bombed have not met that definition of proportionality, necessity, or what was the other one? I forget the other one. But those 3 laws of armed combat, the 3 things, 90%. That's an astronomical number.
This is
it's a guess.
an entirely guesstimate,
guess,
right? Yeah. But I'm going off of things like the amount of ammunition dropped and the fact that I believe it's 44% of Palestinian structures have been razed or damaged.
Sure.
That is disproportionate and that is out of control.
It would only be disproportionate if we can show that those weren't, again, occupied or used by Hamas. I guess let's bring it down to kind of talk to you about, like, if you have a group of Hamas in a school, okay, there's children in that school. Say there's 20 children, 10 Hamas members.
You cannot bomb that school unless there is an explicit strategic necessity to do so.
So those Hamas members from the school are firing rockets into your civilian area, right? They're firing at your wives and your kids, right? They're firing at your husbands. Okay. At what point can you bomb that and stop them from doing that?
Well, I mean, considering the fact that Hamas rocket attacks over the last, I want to say 20 years, but I'll go ahead and say 17, because it's about 17 years ago. 2005 is when I really started a lot of my research. I'm pretty sure that the number of civilian deaths through rocket attacks have been 36. So at that point, unless you say one is too many and every single time they do it, no matter where they do it.
Why are they so low?
Because, a few reasons. So I think it's 2003 I think to 2014 that that was 30 deaths. So there might be some more in recent history, but at the end of the day, they still continue to be way lower than any destruction that Israel lays upon Gaza. But
certainly, I mean,
why do they stay low? So experts have said, and Finkelstein has used the words, glorified fireworks, right? And that's because, even the Israeli press or defense minister, I think it might have been, has basically said, we have, they're launching basically rods. Like there aren't even explosives in some of these. There are weapons experts who have analyzed the weaponry that they used in these rockets, which, by the way, I should note that the United Nations has deemed a war crime. The Goldstone report did call the use of indiscriminate weapons a war crime by Hamas. But one of the reasons
a double war crime. I've read that report because they said it was also a war crime that they used civilian structures to fire out from it. Right? That was
that is a
UN report.
Which report?
I can get you. Hold on, give me a second. This was linked to me, but this was a UN report on Hamas. Give me a second.
Mm-hmm.
I wish I kept these all in one place. That would be wise, right?
Your setup kind of looks like you're a school teacher and you're just streaming from your desk.
No, this is just because I don't know. I'm using a specific corner of my domicile, and yeah, I had this intending to write stuff on it, but I realized that no one can see when I write things on it. I've tried a few times, so it's just a thing. But anyway, like the report.
So why
here we go.
Mm-hmm.
Here we are. Hamas rocket fire is a double war crime, and this is from the General Assembly Human Rights Council in July, from 21 to June to 9 July 2021. Hamas commits double war crimes by targeting Israeli civilians and using its own civilians as human shields, and it goes into the whole thing. So yeah.
And this is a UN report?
UN report, yes, sir.
What was the date?
I'll just send it to you.
Oh, I just mean because I'm curious because I've read some reports. And
2021.
Okay, cool. Yeah, no, please send me that because that one isn't one I've read.
I understand.
But so to answer your question further, why there are so few deaths, Israel also has a significant early warning system and shelters for these attacks. So they have the infrastructure to be defended quite heavily against these.
Why don't Gazans?
Because Gazans have no money. Because after the 2006 election, when Hamas was elected to 74 seats of the parliament, an illegal blockade was engaged by Israel and then backed by the U.S. and the European Union, effectively strangling the government, giving them zero chance to have any kind of hope of creating an economy, creating any sort of state, and that has led to a lot of the issues we see today.
Do you think
a lot more details
they don't have money?
between then and now. That is one of the major reasons. Absolutely, they have no commerce.
Hamas gets
blocked
literally millions of dollars a year
in aid. Yes. They get millions of dollars in aid. It is a country of 2.3 million people. I think 1.5.
What is Hamas doing with that aid? Are they helping the people? Are they building bomb shelters? The concrete that they got sent to build bomb shelters, because they aren't being sent. Just real quick, they aren't being, because this is the thing, right? And I don't know why people don't acknowledge this. That Hamas is getting resources, money, aid, but they are using that aid in order to build tunnels, weapons, and other things, instead of the infrastructure that would be necessary to protect their people. So again, we can say that IDF is still bad. Like, this doesn't excuse the IDF and what it's doing, but we have to remember that, like, in this scenario, Hamas is also victimizing Palestinians, victimizing Gazans, and is absolutely responsible for the deaths that are occurring right now. This doesn't excuse Israel. This doesn't excuse the IDF, but it absolutely must be kind of drilled down that Hamas are bad guys. I don't know.
The
blockade, thank you for the raid, by the way.
The blockade, more so than Hamas use of funds, is the bigger detriment to their economy and safety.
Okay,
also,
why do you say that?
Real quick, to address your point about safety and whatnot, the tunnels, which are used to, they go mostly through Gaza. When Egypt had 1,000-something tunnels coming out their other end, when Hamas was going to try to do some shenanigans down there, they blew up the tunnels that were in Egypt. They didn't blow up the tunnels that were in Gaza. Israel blew up the 11, 18, something like that tunnels that went into Israel, and then blew up a shit ton within Gaza. So Israel effectively neutralized a significant self-defense system that Hamas had created.
Tunnels weren't for self-defense, though.
No, they absolutely were. For the sake of invading IDF, yes, they were for self-defense.
Hold on. So maybe I didn't hear you correctly. So you were saying that the Gazans built the tunnels to defend their people, the Gazans, from aerial attacks?
No, from aerial attacks? No. I'm saying they built them to defend against ground invasions.
So that the people can shelter in there? The Gazans, the Palestinians?
No, so they can attack. It is a self-defense mechanism.
Okay. So to protect the Hamas soldiers from IDF attack.
The soldiers of the
okay, no,
the
I agree
Gaza
with
government.
that. That they did. They built those tunnels so that they could hide from the IDF and be safe. Where did they
Not
build
just
those
be
tunnels?
safe, like to be clear, because I'm not mincing words. Not just to be safe. During Operation Protective Edge, for the first time,
and do their firing and stuff. Yeah.
for the first time, they were actually able to inflict significant casualties on the IDF. And at the end of the day, if the IDF's occupation of Gaza, which maintains to this day, the pullout in 2005 is considered by all international law an occupation. It was not a full-on withdrawal. They just redeployed to the perimeters of the country, or rather the territory. And the creation of the tunnels, at the end of the day, gave them a combat advantage.
Sure. But again, the question is, why are Gazans not protected? Why don't they have any protection? It's because Hamas decided not to build stuff for them, but to build stuff for Hamas, right? You can argue whether they're offensive or defensive or both in nature. That's fine. But the aid, money, and material that is sent to Hamas, who is the de facto government of Gaza, has not been used to protect Gazans, has not been used to help Gazans. And in fact, Gazans are suffering under horrendous tax rates. A lot of their aid is stolen from them directly by Hamas, right? The stuff that does get through, and it's not enough, to be clear, people need to send more, right? But the stuff that does get through is often just straight up taken by Hamas and used for their own purposes. Like every atrocity that Hamas has done towards Israelis on October 7th, they first practiced to their own people in Gaza. Like they threw them off roofs, dude, right? Like after because they didn't win in 2006 election, they failed to win a majority. They only won a plurality. And so they conducted in 2007 a violent coup where they came in, took the leadership of the Gazan people and threw them off the roof. They gave them flying lessons, right? These people have never been, right? Never been a hero of Gaza or a hero of Palestine. They are a state-sponsored death cult that wants to, and again, they have said this, they want to wipe out all the Jews in Israel through any means necessary.
To be clear, I never said
no,
Hamas
just real
were
quick
heroes.
if I finish. And even if that means like sacrificing every single Palestinian to do that, they will absolutely do that. Now, again, right? I don't think you're simping for Hamas here. I don't. I'm not loving that accusation against you. But what I'm trying to what we're discussing today is the IDF, right? Is their bombing indiscriminate? And these tunnel systems, right, that they're using to attack IDF wind all through Gaza, like a network of spider tunnels, okay? So when you say 90% of the strikes that they've done against these buildings have been indiscriminate, not justified, I'm just wondering why your guess is so high. Because if you had said like 20, 30%, okay, I could vibe with that. But 90%, man, like you understand that these targets are, again, today, they are firing rockets from these targets at innocent Israeli civilians. And you could say, oh, they're probably not going to be effective. But yo, that's a hard thing to ask when someone's like shooting rockets at you. To say, like, what do you want them to do? Just nothing?
I mean, so proportionality, first and foremost. Second of all, like I said, I'm not here to say Hamas are heroes, but, kind of give a matter of fact account of, in particular, the four operations I'm most familiar with: Cast Lead, Brother's Keeper, Protective Edge, and to talk about the history of Israeli policies. Are you familiar with the 𝙎𝙬 doctrine?
No, educate me, please.
So in the Second Lebanon War with Israel, Some Hezbollah chuckle fucks decided to come over the border and kidnap 2 Israeli soldiers. They wanted to, I believe they wanted to exchange them for prisoners. And then Israel really wanted to, there's some back and forth with them, and they want to draw Lebanon into the war. So they start to shell the fuck out of a Beirut village. In doing so, they hit a school, kill 66 children. And after that part, they continue to fight. But Hezbollah scared the shit out of them. And I don't mean because, they're the party of God or whatever. They were actually a force that Israel would have had to have genuinely contended with, unlike the slaughter they can do in Gaza. So instead of just targeting Hezbollah and fighting the Lebanese, they went after Lebanese civilians and infrastructure, and they codified the 𝙎𝙬 doctrine. And this isn't made up. This isn't conspiracy theory. This was something that was bragged about by the Israeli Minister of Defense and the government. And it's basically the policy of, and let me just read it explicitly so I'm not misquoting it. Let's see. I don't have the quote, but it was 𝙎𝙬𝖙𝖘𝖍𝖎, and he basically said, we are going to do everything we can, borderline terrorizing people, in order to ensure that they never want to fuck with us again. So instead of taking the fight to the people, or to the militants, we will take the fight to the people and force the militants to stop. Asymmetric warfare, disproportionate attacks like that are war crimes, plain and simple.
I agree.
And that is what's happened in Operation 𝙎𝙪𝙗𝙧𝙤𝙬. That's what happened in Operation Protective Edge, and that is what is happening right now. As we hit the 1 month mark, 10,000 people dead, and the destruction or damaging of 44% of civilian infrastructure.
I don't think that's true, and I'll tell you why, right? Because again, if they wanted to just target so you've seen the images and the photos of thousands of Gazans being escorted, protected, while they are led south to safety by IDF tanks and forces, right? You've seen that? Again, if they were trying to terrorize those civilians, they would have bottled them up.
Nope, because after 2008, 2009, that's the end of, 2009 was the end of 𝙎𝙬𝙗. Then comes the Goldstone Report. The Goldstone Report, for anyone that Googles it and does a lot of lazy research, they'll research it and say, oh, well, it was retracted. No. Goldstone came out and gave a watered down retraction, but in his retraction doesn't actually condemn anything that he said in the past. He doesn't retract any specific points. Everything in the Goldstone Report at the time of his retraction was actually further validated by human rights organizations and UN inspectors.
Okay, well, this was 2008?
This is at the end of 2009.
Okay, 2009.
That Goldstone Report.
Let's deal with today.
Well, no, correct? Because this is all important, because this all speaks to a pattern of behavior from Israel. So 2009, the Goldstone Report happens, and at one point, I believe it was Netanyahu said we face 3 great threats: Iran, rockets from Hezbollah and Hamas, and the Goldstone Report. And at the end of the day, it was even a threat to the United States. Hillary Clinton said that, under this report, America itself might face, war crimes, which may be a fucking just, accusation after our time in Iraq and Afghanistan. At the end of the day, the report showed a funny thing. Hamas didn't use human shields. Israel did. That was one of the big things to come out of the report. Indiscriminate bombing campaigns, direct intentional targeting of civilians, and targeting of civilian infrastructure.
Wait, so is your claim that Hamas doesn't use human shields?
Do you know what a human shield is?
Yes.
What?
Okay, if you are firing rockets out of a school, you're using human shields, and their school is occupied by civilians. That's human shields.
If you are conscripting or launching from a place with the intent for the enemy to not target you, yes, that is a human shield. And since 2014, like I said, my significant knowledge kind of starts to peter off after that point. Since 2014, that may be the case, but up to 2014, only Israel in Operation 𝙎𝙬𝙗𝙧𝙤𝙬 and Protective Edge had ever used a human shield. Now, another thing to be considerate of is the fact that...
Wait. No! You understand that Hamas, or the Hamas equivalent at the time, I think it was the PLO at the time, but a Hamas-like organization, they would strap bombs to themselves, right? Run up and, no, it's not a human shield. I guess you're right. It's not a human shield. But they would strap bombs to kids, put them in the school bus, and blow them up, right? In Israel, right? That happened. That's bad. So maybe it's not a human shield. Maybe you're correct. But to say, oh, IDF, they're the only ones that are using these human shields, and ignoring the fact that these terrorist groups, right, are blowing kids up in order to kill Israeli citizens. This is my problem here, is this asymmetry. We can hold IDF to this impossible standard, or a very high standard, but Hamas or its other the PLO, the PIJ, etc. You know what? We're not gonna talk about that. That's too distracting from Israel.
No,
that's distracting
let's be really
from
clear.
Israel, right?
Let's be really clear. I am I'm holding no water for terrorist actions of Hamas whatsoever. But what I am doing is saying that there's a disproportionate focus put on Hamas when, yes, the more militarily advantaged nation, the one that has explicitly said we use asymmetric warfare.
Yeah, and again, STRATCOM NATO has confirmed the use of human shields by Hamas since at latest 2007. So, and I'll send you the report right now.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, the PDF. Hold on. Here, I'll just, hopefully this works for you. I don't know if it will, but there you go.
Give me 1 second. Does this work? It do be working.
But see, in like, so this is the thing. You'll say something, right? Like Hamas has, like, only the IDF has used human shields, and then we'll look into it and we'll scratch it a little bit, and well, no, that's just not true, right? IDF indiscriminate bombing. We scratched it a little bit. Oh, that's just not true, right? And this is my frustration, because I'm not a Zionist.
No, go one by one.
Just
go
real
one
quick,
by one.
real quick. Let me finish and I'll let you go. Like, I'm just trying to express my frustration here, because every time, like, people will do this thing where, like, oh, we're going to present you with a fact, and I'm like, oh, okay, let's look at this. Oh, this looks really bad, and then I just scratch it just a little bit. And it turns out, well, no, that's not exactly what is happening here. So that's just my frustration right now. Go ahead.
Give me one example.
Again, the human shields. Only IDF has used, this is something you said on my stream just not 5 minutes ago. Only the IDF up till 2014 was the only people to use human shields. But then we scratched that, and we found out, and I don't think you're lying. I think you didn't know. And that, I'm not saying you're lying.
So this is in 2007, as of 2007, I'll have to look at this, but one, this source is a U.S. source, not necessarily to be distrusted. I assume this is from STRATCOM, like American Strategic Command, right? Okay. So as far as the report spanning between 2008 to 2014, which is Protective Edge, Brother's Keeper, Pillar of Defense, and Protective Edge, only Israel was found by the United Nations and human rights organizations to have used human shields. But another thing to think about is there is another thing, which is not a war crime, but a violation of international law, which is disregard for civilians. Both IDF and Hamas have done so. That is when you engage in warfare in areas where it puts civilians at harm. So there's a significant difference. One is to take in either conscripting or engaging from a certain place where you don't expect to be bombed because the other side isn't going to want to bomb those people. The other one is just a disregard for human life. One's a war crime, one's a violation. Both are pretty fucking awful.
Can I ask, is there any scenario or situation that you think it would be justified for a country to bomb an enemy city, a populated enemy city?
It would have to be tied to a significant military or survival need.
So after October 7th, when Hamas broke in and killed all those people, and then they said, hey, we're going to keep doing this, and we're going to keep doing this again and again. Do you not think that, and rightly or wrongly, you could say Israel's calculus here is wrong, but do you not think that the people of Israel and the government of Israel at this point is saying, you know what, I don't know if we can live with these people next to us. I think they have to go, right?
That's not their right to say. Their blockade is illegal. The fighting their right to self-determination is illegal.
And by these people, I mean Hamas, to be clear, not the people.
No, I'm talking about the people of Gaza.
Okay, well, I'm talking about Hamas, not the
Right,
people of Gaza. So,
right. But at one point,
but
they
the
were
people
the
of Hamas.
democratically elected government, and
Well,
at that
again,
point, they chose to
no.
implode. Yes.
They received a plurality, but not a majority, and they violently cooed the other people in power at the time in 2007. So they weren't they did receive a plurality, but it was not enough to because it's not first past the post there, right? They didn't need to just get 51%. They're good, right? It was
Hmm.
proportionality right there. I'm not 100% like with the
The
ins
coup
and
was
outs,
after the blockade, though.
huh?
The coup was after the blockade. So
Yeah,
they
I
took
mean, yes, this is after all
that's
that.
a significant, huge impact on that country.
Sure, the blockade has impacted that country. I'm not arguing against it, but what I'm
Right, right,
saying
right.
is, you're saying that they were just elected. Again,
They
they
were
received a
elected.
plurality once, and then they again threw everyone else that was also
No, we're
elected
talking
out the roof.
sure, but
It,
we're talking
it's
about
just
that moment
weird
in
to say that
history.
they're elected. I don't know.
We're talking that moment in history when the West, led by the United States, encouraged them to hold an election. They hold an election. 74 seats go to Hamas. 44 seats, 45 seats go to Fatah. And
Mm-hmm.
then a few seats mixed out throughout for the rest. But at the end of the day, as soon as that government was elected and Hamas had a significant portion of the parliament, the blockade was enacted not long after. That
Sure,
has a huge impact on that country. That is
it is.
illegal, and it violates their right to self-determination, and it harms the people of Gaza. Commerce, building relationships, recognition on the international stage, all of that
Why
harmed
do
by
you
Israel's blockade.
why do you think they blockaded? What events caused? Like, do you think Israel just hated them and wanted to blockade them?
Hamas at the time has shown at that time and was showing in later times leading up to other operations a willingness to work for peace. Before Protective Edge, they made significant concessions, which included acknowledging Israel as a country, as well as agreements to lay down arms and disengage from violence. If you look at the precursor to Operation Brother's Keeper, no, I'm sorry. Let's go to Cast Lead. In Cast Lead, there was a ceasefire that Hamas had worked very hard to maintain. And aside from a few, disparate rebel groups, whether Hamas competitors or rogue entities within Hamas, Hamas proper was agreeing and keeping in with the ceasefire. And then Israel violates the ceasefire with a nighttime raid, kills 6 or 8 Hamas fuckers, and then surprise, surprise, Hamas retaliates with more rockets, doing little to no significant damage, but then leading to a massacre of Palestinians.
Yeah, fair enough, right? Again,
Disproportionate,
IDF is not
asymmetric, illegal.
what the reason I'm asking you these questions, right, is because, well, first of all, I can't speak to that particular incident. I just can't. I'm not as familiar with it as you are. I am familiar with what is happening today, but I am familiar also with the general practices of Hamas, PLO, PIJ, other such organizations up to them. From 2000 to 2005, right, 140 successful suicide bombers were again gotten out of these the Gaza specifically to Israeli targets and civilian targets. That's the successful ones. That's not the ones that they stopped, the ones they prevented. Those are the ones that actually did damage, killed people, got through. Um, if that was happening, right, in any other area, I don't think we would. I don't think we would be calling them out for enforcing a border, right? Blockading them. Like, again, what are they supposed to do?
No, well, first of all, 2 things. One, suicide bombing, obviously fucking awful. I
Yeah,
was in Iraq and
yeah.
Afghanistan. That shit happened all the fucking time. Yeah, absolutely terrible. Um, but why do civilians have to pay for that?
They shouldn't have to. You're right. You're right. Like, I'm not justifying what Israel is doing in that, but at a certain point, why should Israeli civilians have to pay because we don't want to blockade or enforce a border, right? You're asking Israel to sacrifice its people to protect the people of Gaza, and that's fair, and I think they should to an extent. I agree, but you understand how that's a big ask.
So first thing is 2 things. One, the blockade is
Please.
different from enforcing a border. The blockade was to cripple Gaza. Period. End of story.
That was the reason. Hamas. Yes.
Well, Hamas is often used as as an excuse for doing horrible things to the Palestinian people in Gaza. So Hamas is there. Awful, yeah. Hamas is an awful organization, but like I said, there have been times where Hamas has been keeping the peace, has kept the ceasefire. There was a violation of a ceasefire, I think, leading up to, it might have been around either Pillar of Defense or Protective Edge, and Hamas, some rogue group went and did some bullshit as far as like some shells, some mortars, whatever. Hamas punished them themselves. Like there was a significant effort. Sure. So again, I go back to, we look at the totality of the last 20 years in relations, and we look at Israel. Here's the other thing. The CAS lead. Israel said that it was to bomb a tunnel that was going to be used to capture some IDF soldiers, probably for a prisoner exchange or something. But then we learned that a year before, Israel had been planning the operation, and it seems very likely that they were just looking for a pretense in order to do it. So they...
Wait, you don't think Hamas, if they could have, would have absolutely come across the border and stolen civilians for hostages?
No, it's not civilians.
Or IDF? Well, I mean, but they did when they got the chance, right? They have. Like, we know from October 7th that they're more than willing to do that.
Sure, but in the time
sure, but why? So why are we saying that this is like out of the realm of possibility that they were planning to do that a few years ago?
Because we don't go off the realm of possibility. At the end of the day, Israel broke the ceasefire, provoked an attack from Hamas, and then retaliated with disproportionate force.
Sure.
So if you want to say there were some hellfires dropped in some key Hamas locations and like a handful of civilians died, fine. But at the end of CAS lead, 1,400 lay dead. 500 of which were 250 Hamas, 250 Palestinian police, and 900 civilians.
Even one civilian
number
death
of which were children, a significant number of which were under the age of like 13.
But the question you have to ask is, if they did not bomb that tunnel, if they did not strike that target, how many others would have died? And we can't know. It's an impossible question to answer, right? We don't know, right? Maybe nothing would have happened. But I think we have, again, power of hindsight 2020, significant evidence to suggest that if Hamas was allowed access to Israel proper and was able to carry out their plan, it's likely that it would have been a bloodbath for the Israelis. And the evidence that I will point to you to say that that is likely the case, I'm not certain that's the case, but that is likely to have happened, is that it actually did happen not even a month ago. Or just
Israeli intelligence should be able, and when on the world stage they break the ceasefire, Israeli intelligence should be able to validate that this was, yes, indeed, a credible threat, and we neutralized it.
Okay, so again, are you saying that that's not what Israel says, that it was a credible threat and we neutralized it? Did I hear you wrong? And it was possibly I could have, that was their justification for doing the strike and breaking the ceasefire, is that they had their
justification that they
had intelligence that there was a credible threat from these tunnels, that they were going to break in, capture some IDF soldiers, and do some other things, right? Like, that was the justification they gave, yes?
It was a poorly substantiated justification, yes.
But you say it's poorly substantiated, and yet, we saw when they did have the ability to carry out a similar strike, they massacred 1,200 Israeli civilians.
Oh, I'm sorry. You know, I misspoke. 1 second. Checking my sources.
Please.
The pretext for the raid was that Israel had detected a tunnel in Gaza that might have been intended for use to capture another Israeli soldier. That's why I'm saying that was poorly justified. They didn't say we had a credible threat. They said might have been used. So in doing so, to destroy that tunnel.
Credible threat to me.
No, the existence of the tunnel is not a credible threat. The existence of the tunnel isn't a justification to break the ceasefire.
Well, let me ask you, if today Israel detected a tunnel out of Gaza, a Hamas tunnel out of Gaza that led up into an Israeli settlement.
You do what Egypt did to the 1,000 tunnels in their country. You think
it would have been
side of Israel.
Okay to strike it? Right.
To strike the tunnel on their side? Yes. To strike the side of the tunnel in Gaza and kill people and break the ceasefire? Absolutely not.
Okay.
But like, let's even say for argument's sake, I said credible threat. They had intelligence and they went forth and did it.
Sure.
Then they take rocket attacks and take little to no casualties or damage from those rocket attacks. I don't even, actually, I want to say that in the retaliation, I don't even think anyone died in the retaliation from Hamas. And this is before the Iron Dome. So then they turn around and they kill 900 civilians. They go on a bloody rampage, explicitly targeting too, not just an indiscriminate bombing campaign, which they were found guilty of, but also explicitly targeting civilians.
By the ICC?
No, found guilty as in independent human rights organizations in the United Nations investigation. The Goldstone report, which cites Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, gotcha. And then a significant amount of reporting that was done around this subject.
But the ICC, right?
No. I'm sorry. If we're quarreling over the use of the word guilty, no, they were found to have done these things.
Sure. I just didn't know. Like, I didn't know if they were held. Because this is a problem here. And the reason I'm asking isn't gotcha. It's like, I don't know if they were ever held in international court over this.
Warrants were issued for a few people. And then as that happened, there's a whole thing where like 2 months before the Goldstone report was retracted, Goldstone is giving a speech and he's basically just like reinforcing everything. And then in 2 months, something happens and he comes back and issues his retraction. But again, like I said, he provides no evidence that actually proves. He says, in light of new evidence, but none is provided. And again, independent verification from UN sources.
Wait, so Goldstone retracted this report?
Yeah, I said that before.
Okay.
It was very explicit, but he retracts the report, but doesn't actually justify the retraction.
Okay.
And then independent human rights organizations further verified, had additional information confirming his report.
Okay. But again, right, I understand that again, I'm not defending IDF here in the fact that they have absolutely done things that they absolutely shouldn't have. They're war crimes, they're atrocities, crimes against humanity. Netanyahu's a murderer and he has blood on his hands. I'll cop to all that, right? But my issue is that you, like, coming out of the gate saying after October 7th, well, okay, I'll ask you directly. After October 7th, the IDF started to bomb Gaza and is engaged in this land invasion, ground invasion. You think that's wrong and bad. They shouldn't have done it, correct?
I think that a targeted attack. So here's a few, let me try to draw a picture for you. So I go to all the history because it speaks to the 𝙎𝙬 doctrine, which Israel fully enforces, which is mass destruction to civilians, basically a terror campaign against civilian infrastructure to make them pay. Also, collective punishment is against the international law and a war crime. But either way, so we look at the history of Israel. We look at their acts of aggression where they have not needed, where they have sought reasons to go ahead and go into Gaza and do what they do. But then we compare it now to what has happened after 10/7. We're now at 30 days. I think this is in the last 23 years, maybe longer than I know. This is the bloodiest campaign the IDF has ever waged. 44% of buildings, as I said before, destroyed, damaged. The type of weaponry they're using cannot be used in a discriminate way in such a densely populated area. I'll amend to say a significant amount of that weaponry cannot be used.
But that's just on its face not true, right? Because they have been discriminating, right, in their targets. You could say that they haven't been doing it enough, but again, if they were being, if these weapons solely by their use are so deadly that they cannot be proportional in their targeting, again, in this the most densely packed city in the region, right? 5x5 box with 2.2 million people. Surely it wouldn't be so, like, 10,000 is a lot, but let's put that into perspective of 2.2 million in 30 days.
That is I don't know. What's a nice way to put it? It's not the way to look at it. Because again, densely populated area. I don't know what your job was in the military, but do you know what danger close is?
Cryptolinguist. I wasn't a fellow.
Okay, so but you might have been like exposed to this at some point. Danger close is a rating system so you have like danger close for like 155 millimeter shell is going to be 700 meters, 750 meters. What that means is there is a range of possible error, and then there is other shit that can happen. So if the forward observer is within 750 meters, that's danger close. So you will launch that 155 millimeter shell. And like we said, it's 50 to 75 kill, 150, depending on what's in the way to block the blast, good chance to kill, if not throw some debris and hurt you, right? So that means that within that 750-meter radius, that bomb lands anywhere, it expands the area for damage. So Israel launched 4,000 tons. That is, if my math is correct, it's 100 pounds for a 155 millimeter shell. I think it was 40,000 shells. Now, again, that's assuming all the same caliber. It's probably varied. So let's just say they put 20,000 155 millimeter shells out there. That's a significant amount of firepower. That's a significant amount of damage, all launched on North Gaza. It is not easy. Again, this isn't just about people. This is about buildings and infrastructure.
Yep.
After Protective Edge and Cast Lead, people are talking about like schools and whatnot being bombed. After Cast Lead, it was like 217 schools, I think, 60 nurseries. The number of hospitals that were damaged, I'd have to look it up, but I think it was around 50. That's indiscriminate. And they're continuing to do the same today.
Unless those schools, those hospitals, those buildings were Hamas centers of operation, which they were firing rockets out of in order to kill civilian Israeli, or try to kill Israeli civilians. If that is happening, and just let me ask you again directly, if there is a Hamas operative in a hospital actively firing rockets out of the window of that hospital, is the IDF justified in carrying out a strike against that target?
I think under international law, I don't think that just being used as a base of operations is a justification.
Not just a base of operations, they're actively attacking you from this location, right? So I'm not saying they're putting munitions on there.
No, I'm not talking about weapons cache. I'm not talking about looking over a map. I'm saying as a base of operations. Yes.
Okay, no one, that's just wrong in accordance with international law. If you have a situation where someone is actively attacking you or your civilians or your targets, even your military targets, out of a location, you are allowed to fight back. You are allowed to strike back, right? How you strike back is important, right? If they used a nuke on it, obviously that's overkill, right? But to use a bomb from the air to strike that target is more than allowed by military law.
So are we talking about during this operation, or are we talking about before the invasion and they noted that a hospital was being used?
During this operation, after October 7th. After October 7th, you have the PIJ, Hamas, other groups firing rockets into Israel. We saw all the videos, right, online of this happening, right? They're just actively shooting thousands of rockets a day into Israel. I think Israel, under international law, and we're not talking about the weapon caches, we're not talking about that, but someone who is actively shooting at you from a location, you were allowed to strike that location.
What is the damage being done by those rockets?
They're destroying the buildings. Yeah. They're eliminating the target and it is being effective, because yesterday was the lowest amount of rockets since this all began, right, from October 7th on, that has been fired into Israel. Like, they are taking losses. This is being effective. Now, again, I wouldn't disagree with you that some of these strikes are absolutely disproportionate and absolutely war crimes. Like, again, from what we know, again, that strike on the refugee camp, absolutely a war crime. Because, again, as the IDF itself admitted, they were trying to take out a Hamas leader. I don't think that's justified, right? However, when we take into account that there are people who are actively fighting and trying to kill Israeli civilians out of these things, to say that fighting back or firing back at them is a war crime is wild to me.
Yeah, when you're taking into a hospital into consideration, it has to go higher than just they're there or they're firing from it. It actually has to be causing damage. And one of the things that the rockets have not been doing is causing any significant damage. First of all, not in proportion to Israelis' damage, but second of all, historically, have never caused any significant amount of damage. I think at one point they caused, from 2006 to 2014, maybe like $15 million in damage. How many billions of dollars in damage have been done to Gaza? Every time they do an operation, Cast Lead, 53,000 people displaced, on top of the 900 civilians dead.
In World War II, how much civilian infrastructure, civilians dead, did Japan strike? The strikes Japan did. It's a very, very low number. But when you look at the opposite and the amount of infrastructure and civilian casualties that we inflicted on Japan, 10-to-1 ratio. It wasn't even close, right? Like the numbers are astronomically higher on the damage to Japan's infrastructure and things like that. Was Japan the good guys, or was the U.S. the bad guys here?
No, but the difference is that
the
difference is that Japan is a militarily capable foe for the United States. We led a bloody campaign, island hopping campaign. They did Pearl Harbor. Significant difference between Hamas and Israel when it comes to October 7th, military force.
Again, demonstrated that they were plenty capable if they got the chance of doing some significant damage. Maybe not to military targets, right? Because they didn't really strike at military targets. They only struck at military targets to get to the 𝙎𝖎 center of Israeli civilians. So to act as if like this is a problem, like for too long, Hamas was seen as kind of a joke by Netanyahu. And this is obviously Netanyahu's fault, obviously the Likud's fault, and all their massive intelligence favor. They were seen as a joke, not to be taken seriously. They were thought to be defanged. October 7th, I think, disabused us all of that notion that they weren't a credible military power and things like that. So again, these...
Hold on. So, okay, first of all, that they're not a credible military power. They still are very, very inferior military power. What happened on that day is going to be, as we get further details about the situation, isn't going to just be chalked up to Hamas spent a lot of time biding their time, smuggling in some weapons, and then they finally have power and they can do damage. A lot of that's going to be chalked up to security failures on the part of Israel.
Absolutely.
The number of people dead that day, I think what the final number is, like somewhere between 13 and 1,600.
I've seen mixed reports. So
first,
I don't know.
If I understand the order of operations, first, attack on military targets. They killed about 350 IDF, and then they moved on to the festival and the civilians. Right?
Yes, they wanted to keep and the reason the response time was so long, the 6-hour response time, is because all the IDF that were in the area, they struck at them so that they could do their work uninterrupted. Right? That was their target. It wasn't the military. It was the civilians. They killed the military targets in order to have their way with the civilian targets for as much time as possible without an IDF response. That's again.
That's pretty fucking wretched.
When we talk about Hamas needing to go, and Hamas needing to be destroyed, this is what we're talking about. Hamas is allowed to exist because the question we got to ask ourselves two questions here. Right? And the answer can vary, is what happens if we strike at Hamas? And we're seeing this happen out now, and it's a horror. But you also have to ask, what happens if we don't do that? What is the likely outcomes, not just a year from now, but 10 years from now, but 50 years from now? What happens if Israel were to simply not strike, not do their ground invasion, not do any of that? What is the result and what happens? And we have to
in the past,
we have to be able to answer those questions before we have this conversation, right?
So I don't know much about the organization now, but what I know of the organization from 2005 to 2014, what happened when there was no peace is that Gaza and the administration of Hamas got more legitimacy on the world stage, showed itself as an organization willing to work for peace, and on multiple occasions gave major concessions that they were willing to do to seek a two-state solution. I can only speak to back then. But right now, what you're describing is offensive action when it comes to the IDF, not defensive action. What the IDF is doing now in Gaza,
they are trying to destroy Hamas.
And at the rate of, let's say it's 80-20. There are 30,000 members in Hamas right now. So we'll say 8,000 civilians have died, 2,000 Hamas combatants. And that's an assumption, by the way. Again, with the bomb campaign the way it is, could be even more civilians than it is Hamas. But we'll go with that.
Or it could be reversed too. We don't know. So,
but it historically never has been. This would be the first time.
Fair enough.
So we go with those numbers. What would it take? It would take 80 to 100, 120,000 dead Palestinians for them to wipe out Hamas at this rate. Is that acceptable?
If by wipe out Hamas you mean kill every single member, I don't know if that is the goal or should be the goal. Like the goal here, when we say wipe out Hamas, what we mean is get it out of power. to dismantle and destroy the organization, and so that it no longer has a foothold into Gaza, and it no longer is able to operate out of Gaza. Will that require all 40,000 to be dead? Probably not. We can probably get this. We do have to kill some, right? We have to make them surrender, but we probably don't have to kill all 40,000, right?
Well, we don't know how many Hamas members have been killed, right?
Sure, we don't.
We can only make assumptions that some have.
So
I'd even say that that statistically, yes, Hamas members have been killed. But at the end of the day, violation of international law is
again
not permissible.
Show me how from October 7th to now you are saying that there's disproportional. Again, I have shown you, right, how in my view, and probably in the by international law's view, that these are proportionate responses, right? You have cited things like building damage, civilian casualties. None of these make it, as horrific as they are, make it disproportionate. Not according to international law, at least. By our own moral judgment or our vibes, sure. But by, again, the three sources we have in the law of armed combat, Jen, I just don't have any evidence for this, man.
I mean, just like pretend we know nothing about the military and all that stuff, right? You just have some vague idea about what proportionate bombing is, right? And someone tells you, well, hey, you can't target civilians and you can't target, civilian structures without some really damn good military cause, right? So we know that. And then I tell you, well, 44% of the buildings have either been destroyed or significantly damaged beyond repair.
Mm-hmm.
Are you going to feel like that's a proportionate response?
Because we also have to remember Hamas is a de facto government and has been for years, setting up, again, military operations out of all sorts of buildings. They have tunnels so they can go from building to building to building. So what you have to demonstrate is that a significant, or that a portion, more than ones or twos, right? Because I think we all acknowledge that there are some bombs, right, that have been, there are some strikes that absolutely, I would agree with you, disproportionate war crime should be held accountable. We get that out of the way. If you're acting like I'm saying IDF is doing no war crimes, you're out of your mind. I don't know what to tell you. I am absolutely saying. But that's not the claim you're making. The claim you're making is that 90% of these buildings were war crimes. And that is what I have and draw issue with. Much like I've drawn issue when people are saying, oh, they've only killed 10 Hamas members, right? Like, this is a claim that has been made, that only the IDF has only killed 10 Hamas throughout all this.
Two things. One is when you bomb, you have to take into account everything around you, civilians, infrastructure, etc. You cannot bomb. If there's a hospital near a target, so there are some rules where you can place hospitals and clinics. You can't place them near critical infrastructure in a war zone, like a fuel depot or something like that, because, well, guess what? That's a critical target for a military. They already have the justification to bomb your fuel tanks. You can't put a hospital there, right? But that said, 44% of the buildings, even if Hamas had a tunnel that went under every single one of them, those buildings are civilian buildings. And just because Hamas has a tunnel there, if Hamas has a single grenade sitting in the basement, it doesn't matter. They can't just bomb those because
what if they had a fuel tank within that building? What if they had piles of weapons in that building?
It has to be a significant military advantage. Okay. Strategic decision.
Yes. So if they have, again, a sizable stockpile, you would agree that there is a line that can be crossed with the amount, not just a single grenade, but if they had 10,000 grenades in that building, that might be, okay, now this becomes a significant target. Correct? You would agree?
So even
just hypothetically, would you agree with that? If they had in a building, an apartment building, 10,000 grenades that they have stockpiled there, would that be, in your opinion, oh, okay, this is enough to make this significant enough detriment to their ability to wage war against us, so we can strike it?
As long as they do the right thing and take the time, a knock warning, a 30-minute knock warning is not enough. And that is not meeting GLOAC standards. So if they do what they need to do to get that building free, yes, they can destroy
what is
the
enough
building.
Then? If a knock warning, a 30-minute knock warning isn't enough time to evacuate the area, would a 3-hour knock warning be enough?
3 hours would be nice, but you got to think of a few things, right? There are civilians in here. There are old people. There are disabled people. The size of the bombings when they do that, every 30 seconds up to the 12th, they were launching a bomb, right? They were sending either an air attack or they were launching a shell. So you have to account for the fact that not just that building has to get out, but a lot of the buildings in the region, it's going to cause congestion. It's going to take time. And Israel has shown in the past, before this, before some of the other operations, they have shown in the past that they know how to properly evacuate. We spent days evacuating Fallujah. After the first battle, we had 600 civilian casualties in Fallujah. After the second battle, again, days evacuating, speakers, megaphones, translators, get the fuck out if you do not want to die. Only 600 casualties. That was after 4 weeks, if I have this in the correct order, that was after 4 weeks and 6 weeks respectively of fighting in an urban area. We put the proper measures in. Israel saying you have 24 hours to get the fuck out of North Gaza is not a significant warning. Israel in the past has spent days, they've dropped leaflets, they've made announcements, they've done the right work. Now they're not doing that. That is wrong.
Fair enough. Fair enough if that's your opinion. Again, though, like this, I think
it's frustrating. It's frustrating when you're dealing with a terrorist organization or an insurgency. It's really fucking frustrating that you actually have to play by the rules. And I don't mean that flippantly. I mean that is frustrating. And I would be more. I just don't. I would be more amenable to the plight of the IDF and the Israeli government if, in the past, they hadn't shown that they actually do not give a shit. And that's the narrative I'm trying to draw to with their past history and the previous operations and what they're doing now. They have shown with 𝙎𝙬 doctrine that they will employ this to the terror of the people they are attacking in order to get rid of that government. They have said explicitly they are doing this in order to hope that they get rid of Hamas. But you know the way you get rid of Hamas? It's not through bombing them back to the Stone Age. The way you get rid of radical groups and insurgencies is you work with the people. And if Israel had in the last 20 years shown any kind of empathy or kindness, which they can never fucking argue, putting them under a blockade since 2006, early 2007, they lost the moral high ground to ever say they were doing anything. After they shot that fucking Turkish ship in 2009 that was bringing aid to Gaza, that shit, like Israel has proven time and time again. This was all after Netanyahu got elected,
right?
Was Netanyahu in
2005, I believe he got maybe 2006, somewhere around the early 2000s. He got elected. He got into power, right? He was always a player in the things. But the reason I say that, the reason I ask,
on his shoulders, because there are other people in the government that have also echoed his policies.
He's not alone. He's a figurehead. I get it. There's a sizable portion. But the reason that the Israeli people have been driven right over these years, right, to act like they are now, is because of the way that the PLO, Hamas, and other groups acted after the Oslo Accords. I'm old enough to remember Clinton overseeing Arafat, Rabin shaking hands, right? Like, and watching that live on the news, right? And there was a real like, okay, maybe we could do this. There's a left-wing government in Israel. They're looking, even in as late as 2000, right? The election, right? Even after the Rabin assassination in 1996, there was a left-wing government in power in Israel who won an election off of, let's end the occupation, let's end the settlements, let's end all this, let's get this better. And again, how they were responded to was years and years of terror and threats and death. And so again, if we're going to look at how Hamas was formed and how Hamas was radicalized, we have to look at how the IDF, how the Israeli government, why are they acting as they are as well? We have to do both, okay? And again, I just do not agree that you have presented evidence that Israel has done war crimes in the past. Absolutely. I 100% agree with you. But that is not enough to tell me that what they are doing today is a war crime writ large, that any bombing of Gaza to any degree is considered a war crime. I just don't buy that. I don't think it's consistent with the international definitions of the rules of war, the laws of armed combat. I don't think it's consistent with international definitions of just conflict as a whole, right? I don't think we would be putting this on any other country, right? Even America, right? If the Canadians, oh, those rascally Canadians came in and killed 1,200 U.S. civilians, I don't think any of us would be asking us not to bomb them.
That is terrifying. If they came in and killed, they come over the border and they're pissed that we've appropriated Tim Hortons and they're fucking coming through Buffalo and they are just ravaging, the Buffalo University or some shit like that, right? But then we start to launch shells into fucking Toronto. Yes, that is indiscriminate. That is retributive. That is horrible. The difference as well is that Canada actually has some way to defend themselves. Granted, they're not, they don't have bunkers and early defense systems and all that, but they can actually fire back and make us pay for massacring their civilians.
Gaza doesn't have that. I don't think we have to. The standard isn't, can the other side beat you? It's, can the other side, is the other side a credible threat to you? And I think, again, Hamas has demonstrated that they are a credible threat to the people of Israel. I don't know how we can say that they are not a credible threat after October 7th. So
it's proportionality.
Yes,
right?
and proportionality is to strike their targets to keep them from waging war ever again.
I'm talking about up until the point that Israel decides to strike every time they've decided to strike. Okay, if they come in and they neutralize a few Hamas targets, America has done this before. We've had people fuck up, attack us, or do something stupid, and we bomb an airfield, right? We usually give a fucking warning and say your airfield's going to get bombed. Don't come to work today, right? But we do that. It's a show of force, and it's a go fuck yourself, stay off our lawn, right? But Israel likes to do something they call mowing the lawn, which is that 𝙎𝙬 doctrine, which is anytime they feel that Palestine's getting rowdy, or on a few different occasions where they feel their deterrence capability by showing the world that they're not to be fucked with, the Arab world in particular, when that starts to get a little weak, when they start to get a little antsy, they go ahead, look for a pretense, and then start one of their operations.
But you have yet to demonstrate that that's what they're doing here today. And in fact, we have evidence. We have evidence that they are responding to a credible threat that Hamas poses. Because again, now Hamas not only has demonstrated and actually shown in the real world that they are capable of striking at Israeli targets, but they have said, "Hey, we're going to keep doing this." And again, to act as if Israel cannot respond to that with military force, aerial bombardment, and even, yes, a ground invasion, right? Is again. We're not talking about Hamas as just some nobody organization. It's the de facto government, the de facto people in charge of Gaza. Is it not?
The picture I've been trying to paint is that their response is the 𝙎𝙬 doctrine that they have played against Gaza and they have played against Lebanon, Gaza on multiple occasions, which is rain death and destruction onto the people. Do maximum damage to the people, to their infrastructure, make them not want to fuck with us ever again, make them pay, punish them for the crimes of Hamas. That is what they're doing. First of all,
that's what you say they are doing. That's what your claim is. That's what your assertion is. You have provided no evidence.
First of all, the evidence is borne out again in the explicit words of the general who coined the term after bombing 𝙎𝙬 in 2005, 2006. Second of all, they use that is borne out in the evidence of every military operation they did from 2007 to 2014. And it is clearly being borne out now. Now, to defend this, since you want evidence,
please.
The IDF spokesman, Rear Admiral Daniel Haggerty, made the startling admission that hundreds of tons of bombs, quotes in that one, had already been dropped on the tiny strip, adding that, quote, the emphasis is on damage, not on accuracy.
That I'll link it to you now. Again, through the laws of war, laws of armed combat, we have three conditions, and to say that they're emphasizing damage does not violate any of those three conditions.
When they are damaging significant amounts of civilian infrastructure, yes, it is. They
only
need to be clear, credible military targets.
And I'll read it again, right? Let me get it up. Only if that it is not excessive in relation to the concrete and direct military advantage anticipated. And I think at this point,
what advantage
the dismantling of Hamas so they can't kill 1,400 of their people again. I think that's a great military advantage.
Hold on, wait.
To anticipate.
To be clear, let's compare Cast Lead and 10-7. About the same death toll, about the same military to civilian casualty rate. And
again, I'm not
Qasid,
here to say that IDF is innocent, that there's no blood on the Israelis' hands, that Israeli has never done nothing wrong. I condemn it. 𝙎𝙪𝙗𝙧𝙀, let's condemn that together, shall we? Let's condemn it. It's bad. It's bad. I hate it. I wish they hadn't done it. It's horrible that they did. But let's deal with what's happening now.
Which is okay, cool. Let's deal with what's happening now. Yes. And once again, the Hamas's numbers of dead Israelis is now being paled by tremendous numbers to the dead Palestinian civilians at the hands of the IDF. That is what's happening here.
Again, that does not, and as gross and as horrible and as heartbreaking as that is, it does not, right? The civilian deaths, the number does not, right, impact these three conditions unless the only condition which it would do is if, and I'll read it again, it's not excessive in relation to the concrete and direct military advantage anticipated. So again, I ask you, is the concrete? So let me tell you what that is. The military advantage anticipated is.
Please do.
Let's tell that, right? It's the dismantling of Hamas and its ability to wage war and ever commit an October 7th again. I think that, again, they could be wrong in their calculus here, and they likely are, let's be real. However, if that's what they're anticipating, it does not, by definition, violate the law of armed combat. It just doesn't. Now, you could say it's bad, immoral, and things like that, but you cannot say it violates this law.
I can, because the military advantage would be to deter a threat or to eliminate a threat. Again, the threat that they posed was partially a mistake of the Israeli government and their poor security on the border. But second of all, again, the damage that Hamas is actually able to do on any regular basis is so insignificant compared to what the IDF has done and is doing.
They have demonstrated that they can kill over 1,000 in a day.
One time.
Again, yes, let's make it that. Let's make it one time only. Let's make it one time only. Let's make sure that doesn't happen again.
What allowed them to be able to do that? 2 years of planning, poor security on the border. This isn't just some repeatable, copy paste thing they can do. They've said they want to, fuckers, but they're not going to be able to do that. Israel is ramping up a significant amount of steam, but on the other hand, they are doing a shit ton of disproportionate damage to Gaza. Of course, they're not going to be able to do that
anymore because of the bombing campaign and the land invasion.
The amount of damage that you do in order to achieve that goal has to be proportionate. 10,000, possibly all civilians, but let's say mostly, significantly mostly civilians, is not proportional. And that's the part where those
proportionality isn't they have to be equal in numbers of deaths. That is not what proportionality means.
Hold on. Do you think that the blockade should be lifted off Gaza?
Yes.
Okay. And you would accept how many additional Israeli deaths for that blockade to be lifted?
That's a good question. I've got if you're asking me, okay, let me ask you this:
3 million in Gaza.
Should the blockade be lifted tomorrow? No. There needs to be significant steps to make sure that the Israeli people are protected before the blockade is lifted. I think we can't just snap our fingers and say, blockade, go away. Like, that would be
There's already tremendous
silly
security along the perimeter of Gaza. Well, certain parts withstanding for recent events, obviously. But for the most part, as Israel has bragged, the most high-tech fence in the world, I think at the time when that was implemented, it's the IDF. They could deploy troops along the entire thing and not have a significant, any sizable gap in sight and coverage for that border, or rather perimeter. They could lift the blockade tomorrow. They could deploy troops to the perimeter, lift that blockade tomorrow, and be perfectly secure.
That is wild to say after October 7th, that there is no threat or credible threat that would be posed by lifting the blockade.
Again, the reason that Hamas was able to do what they were doing is because there were weaknesses at the perimeter. So I'm saying they deploy, and they fill those holes, and they will be okay.
But can we guarantee, to at least a reasonable degree of certainty, that after they plug the holes that they have used, the holes in security, the holes in the operational security that they took advantage of, the weaknesses, are they the only ones that the Hamas is aware of, right? Did they play all their cards, or are they holding some back? We don't know. You don't know. I don't know, right? So again, to say that, oh, we could just fix it by fixing these specific problems that they took advantage of this time is just assignine, man.
Sure,
We
but
don't
my point
know. So again,
the
we
pushback
can't
to bring. Hold
until
on, the
there is
point is that proportionality.
until there is
And
a
when it comes to
comprehensive.
proportionality, hold on, proportionality. Look at what happens to Gaza because they have the blockade. They have had economic and human turmoil. Someone once put it, their entire civilization is evaporating before our eyes, something to that effect. This has been one of the, I think at this point, and I am saying I think because I'm not an expert on this and I am quoting other people, that we may be getting near to the point where the blockade has gone on, the illegal blockade, by the way, which Israel has no right to enforce by military action because it is an illegal blockade.
Under what laws is it illegal?
Under international law.
I have no idea. So
under
I'll just cop to that
law,
because I don't know if it's legal or not. So
Yeah.
sure, let's say it's illegal. Go ahead.
Under international law, the blockade's illegal, and under that international law, enforcing the blockade through violent action is illegal. So like the attack on that Turkish ship in 2009, that was illegal.
Okay.
Aside from the fact that it didn't pose any sort of
I'll just
military
give it
threat
to
or
you
whatever.
on that. Sure. I don't know.
But
I don't know enough
with
to try.
that, 2.3 million people have been strangled for 17 years because of that blockade. 16 years.
Because of
for
that
16
blockade.
years have been strangled because of that
Hamas's
blockade.
leadership.
And before that blockade, numbers were not that much different when it came to Israeli civilian deaths, but they were a little higher. But they were nowhere near the number of deaths Palestinians were experiencing year over year and have continued to experience year over year at the hands of the IDF. So when we talk about proportionality, it's a matter of, if I think 122 Americans died due to violence from the cartels in Mexico last year. I think 66. This might be last year, might be 2021. I can't remember what the stat is. I looked up. 66 Israelis died, Israeli civilians, right? Or 122 Americans, enough for us to annex the north of Mexico and to
there
go start.
Is serious
raining
talk about
hell.
us using military drone strikes to destroy the cartels, and I think that there is an argument to be said that would be justified. That if we use targeted strikes against cartels who are causing the deaths of American citizens, not just directly but indirectly through the distribution of drugs and stuff like that, to America, I think there is an argument that you can make. I don't know if I agree with it or not, right? But there is an argument to be made that yes, we can absolutely strike at these things.
I will say that I vehemently disagree with the violation of Mexico's sovereignty and potentially waging war that we know has a high civilian casualty rate on one of our neighbor countries. But that said, 2.3 million under blockade suffering directly because of that blockade.
Yeah, but
and
they're
66
not, again,
Israelis die a year.
We have to ask if that blockade wasn't in place and Hamas was still in charge, would the suffering lessen? And I don't know if that's true because of what Hamas does to its own citizens. Hamas taxes them out the wazoo. They steal their aid that they get. They use any infrastructure that comes in, right? A majority of it goes to building their tunnels and building their weapons of war to wage against the IDF. So again, no, let's be clear. Hamas's enemy isn't the IDF. Hamas's enemy is every Jew in Israel. They have said that. I want to be clear and honest in this. So again, you have to demonstrate, there is an open question, and I don't know whether or not Qassem's lives would significantly improve. I don't know if they would. Someone has to get rid of Hamas. Hamas has to go, right? And we can argue the best way to do that. And like I said, will this bombing campaign achieve this objective? There are serious reasons to doubt that it will. But Israel thinks that it will. Israel anticipates, right, the military objective that they're going to achieve, right, is significant enough to justify this. Now, whether they're right or not, that's a different question. The question is it okay? Is it a violation of international law that they have engaged in a bombing campaign in Gaza? And categorically, by the metrics, by the numbers, that is no. Now, individual strikes,
that is going to be borne out when we have a breakdown of civilian versus Hamas casualties. But first, I want to address a couple things you said. One, on 3 occasions, there were 2 ceasefire agreements where Israel agreed to lift the blockade, to release, at the very least, significant restrictions related to the blockade. Never made good on them. The third one, was predicated on an improvement in the security posture within Gaza, as far as threats to Israel and all that. But the first two, again, when for the most part the Gaza government was playing nice and was working to keep peace, and Hamas was holding their folks accountable, not doing attacks, maintaining the ceasefire, they never got what they deserve. The government was elected, and it's something that is speculative, but it's important to say. You want to point out the Hamas folks, throwing the other side of the government off the rooftops. But before that, when they were elected, they never had a chance. 13 seats, 14 seats have been held consistently by Hezbollah in Lebanon. Lebanon is a sovereign state, internationally recognized. They have a functioning government. Don't know too much about the quality of life in Lebanon. Don't know too much about what it's like over there. I have a few Lebanese friends. They don't talk much about their home life from before they came over here. But at the end of the day, it is not the right, if that 13 should grow to a supermajority, that Israel or any other country suddenly gets to the question the sovereignty of that nation or their right to self-determination. So we don't know what it would be like if the blockade lifted, because Israel failed to do it when they were supposed to. But first of all, they shouldn't have done it in the first place, and it is undeniable, not questionable, that when you blockade a country from air, land, and sea, you do not allow them to do imports of even chocolate and chips, you are going to have a significant moral, economic impact on that group of people. And it's going to hugely affect them, and it's going to lead to things like support for people like Hamas. Like that kind of terror, again, Operation Cast Lead, Pillar of Defense, Protective Edge. You do these kind of murder campaigns within Gaza, you're just going to provoke more. And yet over those three...
Well, Hamas does murder campaigns in Gaza, right? You know this, and it's to strengthen their support. So it's not true, again, across the board, that simply if the IDF stopped, that there would be no support for Hamas. Hamas enforces its support through brutality and fear.
Now, I don't know too much about the Hamas interpolitical operations as far as that goes.
Look into it.
What I do know, and please send me stuff to read.
Sure.
Because Daddy's got some reading to do still.
Yeah.
So, but I never claimed that Hamas was,
I'll just tell you one situation, right? In 2020, I forget the guy's name, right? But it was a Gazan peace, someone who was working for Gazan peace. He's working with lefties in Israel to kind of promote peace. Hamas kidnapped him, tortured him, branded him a traitor. I think they made his wife divorce him, etc. I don't think they ended up killing him, but it was really, really bad. Any Gazan who tries to work towards peace with Israel is punished by Hamas, right?
This may be new policy because, again, back when in the time frame I've talked the most about tonight, Gaza was working towards peace. Hamas was working towards peace.
Maybe in like 2000 or something, right? Or 2007, right? Okay, but today
9 to 14, and those were significant formative periods.
Today, sure. While it's happening now, they absolutely have not been.
There was a conflict in, I think, 2018 and 2021. I still have to research and see what happened there. So I don't know who the belligerent was, who the antagonist was in those conflicts. But the reason I feel even more so I need to look into it to see how we got to where we are now is because, again, historically, in the past 16 years...
Can you also send me some links on whether Hamas, where's your sources on Hamas was working towards peace? Because, again,
absolutely.
I want to read up on that. I got some reading to do as well.
Yep, absolutely.
Please do. Yeah.
But I think that, to sum it all up, Gaza didn't have a chance after 2008, 7 rather, after the blockade. That kind of thing is going to exacerbate that alone, just the blockade, nothing else. That blockade is going to exacerbate things. It's going to put pressure on the government. It's going to cause civil unrest, and it's going to cause pain, stress, turmoil, for unlivable conditions. Like, we're not even talking about, the annexation of land or the settlements or anything like that. Just the blockade alone is, especially when it's not just imposed by Israel, but backed by the United States and the European Union, that is going to be
Egypt,
devastating. Yeah, it's going to be absolutely devastating. So then you go through years and years of massacres and abuse by the Israeli government and the IDF. Again, going to cause more turmoil. That's going to exacerbate the situation both domestically for Hamas and the Gazans, and it's going to exacerbate it on the grand scale of international politics. 2005, when they pulled out of Gaza, they redeployed. Here's the other thing: Israel has not been working towards peace. Israel since the 2000s. Probably before, based on other actions, but we'll just talk about since the 2000s, Israel has not wanted Palestine to be recognized as a state, and they have not wanted peace. In 2005, and this is by quotes from, internal ministers in the Israeli government, the goal of the 2005 pullout was, one, to ensure that there was no predominant populace of Arabs or Palestinians rather, in Israel that had voting rights. They did not want to enfranchise them. They did not want to take complete control of that territory and give them those rights. But second of all, it was to freeze the political process. It took pressure off Israel when they pulled out. The eyes of the international community took a step back, and they were able to freeze, by their words, freeze the political process and prevent Palestine from being recognized as a state. That is an explicit, aggressive act, aggressive politically, towards not giving Palestine their statehood and not getting them recognition on the international stage.
Oh yeah, Netanyahu and his government and his ilk have been a detriment to the peace process. Absolutely, you won't get argument from me on that, right? They are not. Netanyahu has not been working for peace. Absolutely, you are correct. They're not wanting a two-state solution. Absolutely, you are correct. I agree.
Yep, 1,000%. I think after during the first Intifada in the 80s, Netanyahu said that that Tiananmen Square took the eyes off of Israel for enough time, and this is after the fact, and he said that the government should have expelled hundreds, if not thousands, of influential Palestinians from the West Bank with their eyes being off it, because hey, make our lives easier, make it easier to conquer this land. Absolutely. Yeah. 2014, he gets his chance. That Ukrainian airline went down. And when that went down, that's when he chose to initiate 𝙎𝙪𝙗𝙧𝙞𝙗𝙗. I think it was Pillar of Defense. When they went and did Pillar of Defense in Brother's Keeper, they had the Goldstone report hanging over their heads because they knew eyes were on them. They knew that organizations, they couldn't hide their war crimes. They couldn't hide their belligerence. They couldn't hide the 𝙎𝙪𝙗 doctrine and the way that they waged war. So for a lot of the time, I think it was Protective Edge. I think they decided to do it entirely by air. And then the PLO leader, I think it was, or the Hamas leader, I think it was the PLO leader, said, go ahead, invade, and called Netanyahu's bluff. And then Obama said, knock it off, and Israel backed off. But if they were really quelling a significant threat, why would just the word of Obama have been enough to tell them to back off? Why would Obama have told them to back off if it was actually preventing them from securing any sort of advantage that prevents significant Israeli death? And that's the issue what I'm having here, is that 10,000 people have died. The numbers are going to bear out after the independent investigations.
11,500. We're gonna include the Israelis.
IDF's on a roll, baby.
We're gonna include the Israelis and the people who have died. We're going to include the Israelis every time we say that, because Jews are people too. But
Jews are absolutely people. But the issue is that they have died, and that massacre happened, and now IDF, the Israeli government, are attacking Gaza, and the blood is being spent way too fast on innocent lives, people's livelihoods, people's homes, in absolute chaos and destruction. It is a blockaded area where the only people who can leave are those with special permission and work permits to enter into Israel during the day, and then they have a curfew to come back at night. They told these people, go to the south, get out of town. These people have nowhere to go. They have nothing good. 98% of the groundwater is undrinkable for Palestinians. Israel cuts off 1/3 of the water supply that they control. or they control 1/3. They cut off 1/3 of the water supply.
Yeah, I don't disagree with any of this.
They prevent food. They prevent aid. Granted, some of this got reversed, but they do that. We can chalk it up to a knee-jerk reaction. But at the end of the day, with the history of what Israel has done to Gaza, it's a little hard to do that. So then they open the gates again, and they start to get some aid and support and whatnot.
Yep.
66, something like that. 33 something. UN workers have died, the largest in any conflict, I think, or any conflict in any significant amount of time. And 10,000 Gazans have died, and the majority of them are going to be borne out to have been innocent civilians. 1.1 million people in that area are under the age of 18. It's too much destruction. 44% of the buildings, and this was as of a few days ago, it's probably more now, 44% of the infrastructure has been damaged or destroyed, civilian housing. That is just too much wanton destruction for me to say that with the, dozens of Israeli lives that are lost each year to violence, it continues to be disproportionate what happens to Gaza versus what happens to Israelis. And yet we're apparently very comfortable punishing 2.3 million people and letting them be terrorized because, we hate Hamas. And I think the civilians are paying the price for that.
Okay. I guess in closing on my end, right? You paint a really bleak picture, and it is bleak. I want to be clear, right? You are right to say that the Gazans are in hell right now, that they are being terrorized, that there is a campaign, right, to destroy them that is ongoing. But that isn't from the IDF, it is from Hamas. Hamas has explicitly said, hey, we are willing to sacrifice men, women, and children if it means getting rid of Israel. They have, and it is not hyperbole to say that they have made a massive human sacrifice and being willing, after October 7th, being willing to do all this, right? This would stop if Hamas surrendered. If Hamas gave up the hostages and surrendered, this would stop, right? The IDF would still do bad things, right? But this air campaign, this ground invasion, it would stop. But it's not stopping. These 44% of buildings, you say that they're all civilian buildings. I say that's not true. I say that Hamas uses civilian buildings and puts military equipment, material. They also use these buildings as places, and as the UN source I cited to you shows, they use them as operation centers to actively attack Israeli targets, not just the ones that are invading them from the ground, but the ones that are like the civilians within Tel Aviv and other areas of Israel, right? They actively do this. So to call these 44% civilian targets is misleading and deceptive. I don't think you're lying. I think that you really believe all of this. But I think there is much more to this than the narrative that you have painted. And I think that we can see it through the words and actions and deeds of Hamas and the other actors in the area. We have to ask ourselves not only why do Gazans support Hamas, but we have to ask why do Israelis support Netanyahu? There's no good guys here. I'm not a pro-Zionist. I am pro-Israel, but I'm also pro-Palestine. If we want Palestine to be free, Hamas has to go because Palestine will never be free while Hamas exists. Now, you can argue, and I would agree with you, that there are probably better ways to go about this. But again, to say that this violates international law is just not true. To say that this has the campaign in and of itself is indiscriminate is just not true. But I thank you for your time, and I thank you for coming up. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about or discuss, or anything you wanted to go over?
No, I think that's about it. I'll send you over some stuff to read.
Especially on the Hamas people looking for peace, because I am really interested in seeing sources on that. Yeah.
Absolutely, and in fact, I'll get those right to you as soon as we hang up. But otherwise, I think the next time.
Are you okay with people, because people want to come in and ask you questions, ask me questions? Take callers one at a time, or are you not down for that?
Let me see. 1 second, let me check my schedule.
Sure, it's up to you. No pressure or anything. I know you wanted this to be a one-on-one, but there's people who I want to come on and say something, and if they want to.
Okay. I'm not against that, and I love to be tested and all that stuff. But I will say next time I do want to talk to you again very soon.
Please.
But I have to edit my video for tomorrow morning, and I'm way behind.
Do you think, man?
So
No problem. No shade.
I had to check the edit. I still have to
All
like.
good.
I'm half. Of
I did enjoy this conversation, right? Like I know it got a little heated here and there, but I think you're a great guy. This is the first time we ever talked, but no, I'm impressed. I think your command of some of the facts are great. I just worry that that's just it. It's some of the facts, and we need a more complete picture. But the same could be said for me. I want to be clear. I am no expert on this by any means, but I haven't just started learning about this and looking into this on October 7th. Again, when I was 9 years old, I was raised Mormon, right? I read a book written by one of the general authorities in my church, right? The 6-Day War. And it's something I've been low-key following for a while. Again, not an expert, not claiming that, but it's not new.
No, neither am I. Like I said, this has been a slight interest for about 4 years, and then like randomly on a whim, apparently preparing for this fucking moment, I was like, I want to start looking into this, like back in like June, and then here we are.
The silver lining to all this, which I think we could both agree on, Netanyahu's probably toast. He's probably done. Like looking at all the polling numbers, all the political kind of signals that are coming out of Israel right now, Netanyahu and his ilk are going the way of the dodo, going the way of the dinosaur. It's abysmal. It's in the trash. It's in the gutter. Like I think only 12% approval rating or something like that is the last I checked. So hopefully soon Netanyahu will be gone. And I think that regardless of what we think of anything else, that is going to be a blessing for both Palestine and Israel.
Well, let us hope. There's the never Trumpers, and you ask them, okay, well, who would you support? And when they say the person, it's like, oh, okay, different dude, same views, right? So fingers crossed, it's something more substantive than just you're responsible for this attack, but then it continues the same policies, right?
One thing I'll ask also before you go, I don't know if you saw the poll that was released not too long ago, but it shows that for people 34 and under, around 49% of them say that Hamas attack was justified. What do you think about that? And this is America, an American poll. Right?
Yeah, I don't think that terrorist attacks are justified from either side. Like, sure,
but the fact that 49% of people under 34 do, that's a question. Like, what are your thoughts here?
I don't think we have like 44% of our country is about to start taking the side of Al Qaeda, right? I think that those people probably are ignorant. Like they are probably read up on some of the conflict and what has happened and whatnot. But they don't know how to differentiate between, freedom fighters and, people that really shouldn't be in power doing what they're doing. But can you send me that study? I think it was like a Harvard thing or something like that, right? It's a Harvard
poll, indeed.
Yeah.
I'll link it to you. I'll get you the link after this.
Perfect.
Anything else?
No, it's been.
Where can people find you if they want to?
So first, I'd like to talk to you again, maybe in a week or so,
Sure.
and we can talk about like some of the other policies when it comes to doctrine around how we handle insurgencies and that stuff. I think you and I might have some shared experience there with. I don't know if you say what language were you?
Mandarin Chinese, so I didn't deal with Middle East stuff. So.
Were you an officer?
No.
Oh, damn. When I was in the Marines, they only made officers Mando Chinese.
Which branch were you in? I was in the Air Force.
I was in the Marine Corps. Yeah, Air Force gets to do a lot more fun shit. Yeah. But yeah, I would like to talk to you again. And that time we can talk to your audience and take questions. So guys, I'm not running from you. I'm new to editing. So, but if you want to see my edits, Lycan cooks on every platform, whether it's Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, or YouTube. There's some shitty streams on YouTube. I also stream on Kick, Lycan Cooks. So if you want to watch me make my videos and actually see the cooking process, or if you want to watch the final product that's only 60 seconds, you fucking Zoomers, you can check it out. But Wick, it's been great chatting with you. It's been great watching you have your panels and all that. And I appreciate your time, man.
Oh, appreciate you too. See you later, buddy.
Bye, man.
Bye.